Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Movers Podcast, the off-topic podcast for Avatar: The Last Airbender Online.com. This is going to be episode 49 of the Movers Podcast, and this one is for Fooly Cooly, which is Greg's pick, and we're recording this on August 20th, 2017. I'm going to be your host for this first section of the podcast, Morgan, Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
And also joining us is Hyru85 Harrison from the side also.
Hello.
Excellent. So, no Kelly, unfortunately, this time out, but we will hopefully have her back next week. So, yeah, before we turn things over to Greg for his pick, we'll start off with what we usually do in the Movers Podcast to start off, and that is go over kind of what we've been watching, playing recently. We haven't done the Movers Podcast in a while, so there's probably a little bit to talk about. And I suppose, Greg, why don't you start us off? What have you been watching or playing recently?
Not too much. I actually have watched, I guess, a few movies. But I mean, I guess the series, I'm still watching Dragon Ball Super. That still hasn't, still in, I guess, sort of the main sort of fighting arc here. So that's still pretty good. But I guess the only other thing I've been watching, I've watched a few movies. They've been out for a while, so it's nothing that people probably haven't already seen. I just didn't get a chance to round to watching them. So I watched Logan. I watched Ghost in the Shell. I watched randomly Kong Skull Island just because I could get it. So I guess those are a few. I think I've watched a couple others as well, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. But yeah, that's what I've been watching recently.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Harrison? What have you been watching, playing recently?
I've just really getting caught up on Netflix. I watched Luke Cage and Iron Fist, and then this past weekend binge watched all of The Defenders. So other than that, that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Myself, in addition to the usual stuff that I kind of watch every week, like Boruto, Next Generations, the main, I suppose, anime from this season I'm watching is this one called Classroom of the Elite. The Japanese name is very, very long. I can't even remember what it is, but Classroom of the Elite, they are doing a dub of this one as well. I think the sub is on episode 6, the dub is on episode 3, and it's definitely really interesting. The premise of this one is basically that it's like obviously an elite kind of school that people go to, so it's like all the best from like the previous kind of schools have been put into this classrooms, and they're ordered in terms of like the best students in A, the kind of worst but still the worst of the best in class D, and there's this kind of point system involved in it where basically because it's this elite school, the school like values them all as being worth like 10,000 points, which is like given a money value, and they get that much every month, but they spend it all basically in the first month, and then kind of don't really apply themselves in school, and when their first like kind of months of tests kind of come back, they realize that, oh, this thing they weren't told about the rules was that they lose points if they don't do so well, and Class D, which is the most of the characters that are focused on, they do so badly that they have 0 points, so anyone in the class who spent all their points doesn't get any money for like the next month, and it's a pretty cool thing, as like you basically set up this kind of rivalry between all the classes, and the fact that if you earn more points than like a class above you, you kind of become that class, and it's a pretty cool thing. Other than that, the main game I've been playing is I kind of went back to Halo 5 to play primarily the firefight mode, which is kind of a PvE. It's basically just a group of players versus the AI in kind of 5 rounds against bosses and stuff like that. It's pretty good. And also, because I'm kind of on a Halo kick recently, I've been kind of reading, listening to some of the audiobooks as well. Which I've read most of them before, but I recently read the new one, Halo Last Light, and listening to some of the older ones like Halo Fall of Reach, First Strike, and so on. So that's pretty cool as well. But yeah, that's the what I've been watching, playing segment. And yeah, I guess we'll turn things over to Greg from here to introduce us into the discussion topic for Fooly Cooly.
All right, so Fooly Cooly or Fruity Cooly or FLCL is, you see abbreviated, is an action comedy science fiction 6-episode OVA, so original video animation. It originally aired in Japan from April 2000 to March 2001. There also is a manga that was created around the same time, and then later on, eventually it aired in the U.S. on Adult Swim in, I believe, 2003, a bunch of times actually, and then it also aired on, I guess, Toonami, which is also Cartoon Network as well, in 2013 to 2014. It's directed by Kazuyu Tsurumaki, who also was the assistant director on the Evangelion series. It was produced by, I guess, the FLC production committee, which consisted of Gainax and Production IG. Gainax obviously did Evangelion. And it also has, and this was just recently sort of announced, I think it was announced last year, that it's actually coming out with 2 new seasons that I think they're supposed to be starting in 2018, I believe. So the series, it's pretty well received overall. It has an 8 on MAL, I think a 8.3 on IMDb. It's one of those series that people really sort of talk about a lot. It has a lot of sort of, I guess, inspiration bases. One of the reasons why I sort of picked it is because it has some inspiration from series we've seen before. The music is made by this alternative Japanese rock band called The Pillows, which is one of the, I guess, notable things about the series. But before we get too much into, I guess, my reasons for choosing, and let me hear you guys, I guess, sort of initial sort of reactions to the first 2 episodes.
Yeah, it's interesting, I suppose, just knowing that like we've watched the third of this series right now, at least, while the rest of it, the second, third, whatever they announced, seasons aren't out. Overall, it was a bit of a weird experience watching these 2 episodes, in that I think fundamentally the show is just very odd and weird, in that like there's no real structure to it, but there's a lot of interesting things like about it going on, but at the same time you're never really told all that much or like informed about what exactly is going on. You just kind of go along with the ride and just accept whatever's happening. So it's a weird one where like I kind of neither like love it nor do I like really dislike it. It's just kind of somewhere in the middle where I'm like, I like aspects of this, some of it's a bit over the top, but it's definitely interesting, and at the very least it's really, really well made. You can definitely tell that. But Harrison, what are your initial impressions on Fooly Cooly?
About the same as yours. Like, I wasn't sure what to expect because I haven't heard of it or anything like that before. So yeah, it definitely was a very unexpected experience. Kind of like what you said, Morgan. Is like I don't think it was bad, but I'm not like in love with it either. It was just interesting and unexpected and a very odd show. But yeah, it was. It just left me a little speechless because I just wasn't sure what to expect, and I was not expecting that kind of a show. It was just very interesting and different for sure. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a different type of anime, especially if you're used to more, I guess, the more, structured sort of, I guess, linear sort of plot-driven sort of animated. And, this being sort of a OVA, it definitely has a more of a, I guess, sort of a experimentation sort of feel to it, where, they're able to sort of try different things, as I'm sure we'll sort of, we'll discuss as we sort of go on. But I don't know, I guess my reasons for sort of choosing it is, it's one of those anime that, it's always sort of recommended to people, and sort of comes up as one of those ones that people try to use to sort of get other people sort of into anime and sort of have them, I guess, sort of experience sort of anime for the first time. And it has a sort of a I guess a cult sort of following behind it, and it has a bunch of sort of, I guess, references that you can sort of look forward to if you're paying attention to it. And it has like I sort of hinted at before, it's the creators of Avatar, they've been sort of inspired by this, if you've heard any of their sort of interviews before. So I don't know, I thought it would be interesting to sort of bring it up and see how this different type of anime than what we've been discussing before, how you guys thought about it. So I guess we'll sort of jump into sort of just, I guess, our initial, I guess, sort of my first sort of talking point here is just sort of, what did you guys sort of feel for, I guess, sort of the structure of it so far, as you've seen in these first 2 episodes? Like, how did you sort of were able to, I guess, adapt to the weirdness of it?
Yeah, it's weird because, like, when it starts off, you think it's this, like, very, like, character focused thing, and that, like, it's just a random town and it's just all these characters, and, like, the characters seem interesting enough, and it seems like there's some relatively, like, serious and, like, interesting things going on in their lives. And then, like, basically it feels like almost like a character from, like, another anime, like, just comes into this one, and, like, she's the crazy one who has all, like, the unique kind of fantasy kind of elements of this show. And then they're suddenly just like, oh, and there's this, like, robot manufacturing plant in the background, and here she is with this, like, space Vespa thing, and this like, super powered guitar that can do special things, and these robots and weirdness. But then it kind of forgets about that sometimes and goes back to being a very, like character relationship focused show. And then it just kind of goes back and forth between being, like, crazy and then being quite serious. And it obviously depends, I think, going forward, on how they attempt to, like, bring these two things together. Like, what is the robot stuff? It feels like right now where, like, I'm kind of invested in the characters, and I kind of, in a way, don't care, like, almost at all about the robot stuff. It kind of feels like a distraction from maybe the stuff that I'm interested in, but I'm kind of open to seeing where it goes from here. But definitely it's weirdly structured, I do think, just in terms of, like, when did they decide to, like, turn the crazy button on and when they decide to turn it off. But Harrison, what are your thoughts on the structure of this show so far?
It was definitely interesting. It was kind of hard to follow for me, just because, like, everything just moved along so quickly, and I don't know if there is a dubbed version. I had the sub version, so maybe if there is a dubbed, that would be easier to follow. It's just the sub, I know, like, just reading the subtitles, they were just moving along so quickly, and then when multiple characters are talking, it just, things got complicated. And so that just might be showing my noob skills to anime, because I'm not very experienced in the whole genre or style of animation or anything like that. But it was interesting, for sure. Like, yeah, like you said, we kind of have the two sort of crazy things. Like, we have, like, the main guy and, like, his sort of story and stuff like that, and then stuff with his girlfriend, and then also, like, the crazy biker girl with all the with the robots and the fighting and all the stuff like that. So it's interesting. It was a little hard to follow, but I mean, nothing too crazy for me not to keep up with it. I would eventually kind of know what's happening and things like that. So it's an interesting choice to have it be like this sort of crazy zany way, but I mean, it's kind of working so far. I mean, yeah, the crazy stuff is very crazy, and it's usually unexpected. I'm not sure why. Like, oh, why is this happening? Oh, okay, I guess it's just happening. I'll just go with it. One of those things is kind of just how I'm doing it. So it's like it's one of those things where you just kind of have to suspend your logic, I guess you could say. Just like, this is happening, just let it happen and accept it. And so once I did that, I found the show was easier to enjoy and follow along with, just because just don't be rash about the things. You just kind of let the stuff play out as it's doing it, and you can have a better time that way. But yeah, I'm definitely more interested in like what's going on with like the story, and especially the stuff that came up in the second episode is just like, oh, okay. And then the robot stuff was just like, where did this come from? It was just kind of literally came out of nowhere, and but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It was just unexpected. A lot of the show was very unexpected, so it's just very different. And I think once you just get over the fact of how different it is, you can probably have a pretty decent time watching the show. So, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is different in that sort of aspect as far as when things sort of come into play, and like Morgan said, when they choose to actually turn on the crazy button, it definitely adds a different sort of element to this series. And with it being such a short one, they definitely sort of go for it. Like there's definitely some times where you'll see like the whole style of how the animation is being done in the scene, or when they have like I guess sort of like a massive sort of random sort of battle come out of anywhere, where they choose to have I guess some of the quieter moments, and then they sort of ramp it back up really quickly. It definitely can be at times sort of hard to follow, but I think like Harrison said, it's one of those things that sort of when you sort of can accept or try to sort of let go of what's actually happening, it's still at its core is very sort of I guess entertaining, and can be pretty lively. There is I guess a bit of difference between sort of the sub versus the dub as far as being able to sort of follow it. I think the first time I watched it, I did watch it as a sub, and it is interesting trying to sort of keep up with it, especially if you're not, used to reading subtitles at like a fast pace. You like have to choose, what you want to follow. If you want to follow the text, or you want to follow sort of the animation. The dub does change things a little bit, and they also did some localization, I guess, more so with the dub as well. So some of the terms that are more sort of Japanese sort of pop culture references that English audiences might not get as well, the dub sort of they translate and convert it over, even if it isn't sort of like a exact sort of one-to-one sort of translation, literal translation. So there definitely is I guess a bit of difference, but at its core is still the same sort of I guess weird and odd sort of concepts that it tries to introduce to the viewers while telling the story of Naoto and his I guess sort of his maturity over these 6 episodes. But I guess next up, Morgan or Harrison, if you got a point to talk about.
Yeah, I suppose I'll go next, and I suppose my talking point is just going to be more about the I suppose what makes this show unique, what its kind of like gimmick, I suppose, as an anime is, and that like it's not just about characters and it's set in a fairly realistic world. It seems like it's that, but then they introduce this kind of idea of like the only unique thing in the whole town is that there's a robot manufacturing plant there, and the robots come into play a bit later on, and then this woman Haruko comes in and effectively says she's an alien, and like she's some form of a like police officer type thing, space patrol officer, and her guitar is effectively like a super weapon that can destroy robots, and then has this effect of turning the main character's head into like a portal where robots can come through these horns. It's probably one of the weirdest kind of like things, because it's so specific and just it does really come out of nowhere. It's really weird in that like you do get to this point where like they introduce this stuff like at the start of the second episode, and it's just like, are we really doing this? Like this show is now turning into like portal to a different dimension in someone's head, and where they go from here. It's very weird introduction of a kind of like mecha theme into an anime, but I don't think it's like bad or anything like that. It's just it is all the random elements of the show that come into play with the robots and so on, and right now it seems to like, to what aim are these robots here, and that like the robots introduced and like the main one doesn't really do much, and then like they're fighting for some reason, and then why is she here from space? It's just like, what's the aim with this robot stuff at the moment? But Harrison, what are your thoughts on the robots stuff being the kind of, I suppose, main gimmick of this anime?
It's interesting for sure. I mean, I do like how it's kind of like an ordinary town with this big factory and stuff like that. So I found that interesting, and I want to know more about that. Like, hopefully in future episodes, they might go into that a bit more, because I wasn't sure if it was going to be like an environmental thing, or how they're going to, what angle they were going to play with the factory. But yeah, then the whole robots and forehead thing, that was definitely, again, unexpected. I'm probably going to use that word a lot in this one, just because, like, he had like the little horn thing, and at first I thought, with some animation shows, when you get hit in the head, that's how they symbolize like a bruise or whatever. So that's just what I thought it was, and then it became so much more than that, and then it just grew, and then the robot came out. I was just like, oh, okay, that's a robot that just came out of his forehead, and then when it started happening again, I was like, wait, is there now going to be another robot? Is this going to be a thing where robots just come out of this kid's head? And so I guess it is. So I'm just, okay, I'm interested to see how and why. Like, I don't know really any of their names, but I'm just going to call her the biker girl with the guitar. Like, why she hit him on the head for the robots to come through. Like, was it a thing she did on purpose? Or what was the whole reasoning for that? Or so it's definitely interesting. The robots are an interesting aspect, but not the aspect I personally am, like, I guess, invested in, because I just want to know more about what's going on with, like, the characters and their own stories and stuff like that. What's going on with the town, and then these robots just kind of come along and destroy things and sometimes provide some comic relief, which is like, okay, sure, but can we get back to the other stuff? So, like, I mean, like, it's not bad or anything, but it's just interesting and different, and I just personally prefer the kind of what the storyline or character stuff has got going on than the robot stuff. But the robot stuff is just kind of entertaining stuff, I guess, to be there. Maybe they'll come together in later episodes. But yeah, it's interesting for sure, and just not my favorite part of the series, I guess you could say.
Yeah, the robots are definitely interesting as far as how they use them in the series and the battles. I think a lot of people, the robots just stand out because they're just, especially Conti, I guess the main robot that we see most of the time that's doing all the battling. He visually sort of stands out. So, like, you'll see like a lot of like art and stuff of him specifically. But it is interesting how they choose, I guess, to have the battles with the robots, and how that sort of, it seems like it almost interrupts, like you guys are saying, sort of like the smaller sort of character bits. But it definitely does sort of add, I guess an element to the series that you otherwise wouldn't sort of expect to actually sort of have, which, the show in general is just, it's all about sort of unexpected things. I mean, the whole idea that Naoto senses, like, nothing ever interesting ever happens to this town, and he even says it sort of after the first sort of big battle, but clearly there's something going on in this town, and the fact that they have this robot sort of facility at the top that looks like a iron is just one of those odd sort of aspects of this show. And you do sort of, later on, you do get, I guess, a bit of answers about, sort of the robots, or sort of not specifically robots, but I guess sort of Haruko, and sort of, why, she's sort of there, and sort of the patrol and the force that she's sort of part of. And you do get some answers. There may not be sort of, I guess, answers you like, or answers that you fully understand. Like, the show is always going to be odd, and it's one of those things that there's always going to be, I guess, different sort of interpretations of what sort of is actually going on with Naoto and just sort of the town in general. So it definitely is, I guess, the unique sort of aspect of this show, which lends itself to people either sort of really sort of liking it or really not liking it, or sometimes you can be like more like me, where you're just sort of in the middle and you can sort of enjoy the ride but not sort of try to think too hard about all the different sort of aspects of the show and how they sort of have to work together in some sort of perfect sort of way. So it definitely has some unique sort of gimmicks that sort of either work for you or maybe not work for you as much. But yeah, it definitely is something to keep in mind. But Harrison, I think you're up next if you have a point to talk about.
I guess just, how about I guess Takun, is that the main guy's name? And his girlfriend. I guess just their relationship through the whole series. How there's sort of the development and sort of development of that, their just interaction throughout these first 2 episodes.
Yeah, this is weird in that like the first scene, like before you really, I suppose, have full context for like how kind of old each of them is, it kind of is like what's going on here? But then you kind of find out that like okay, so he's only like 12 and she's like 17, and this relationship is kind of like the replacement relationship for like her relationship with his brother. And like it makes it kind of seem really weird that like she's kissing his neck and stuff like that, that he has no idea what she's doing for the most part, just that it's kind of weird, and clearly she either wasn't like included in the brother's decision to leave, or they left on bad terms or something like that, because she seems very kind of lost without him. I don't think we've heard the brother's name, but I assume the reason she calls everything, basically she names like the cat Taku, and she names him that, is that the guy's name begins with TA or something like that, and so she's replacing everything around her with his name, and that she's kind of obsessed with him. It's definitely like, I think, one of the most unique relationships in that it seems really like weird and like slightly creepy initially, but then you kind of realize that no, he actually kind of does care about her, and wants to protect her, because over the course of the 2 episodes you kind of realize that wait, she's never in school, she looks like she never goes home, or maybe she doesn't have a home, or something like that, and so clearly she has some like issues in her life beyond just what happened with the relationship with the brother. And then adding in the whole like obsession with this game, and more or less kind of establishing that she's kind of a pyromaniac is kind of like a weird angle. In a way, like she's probably the most interesting character, Mamimi, or I think that's her name. I just found like her definitely like to be one of the more unique aspects of the series, in that just some unique kind of themes with regards to like the situation she's in that you don't often see explored with her. But I suppose Harrison, specifically, what are your thoughts on Naota and Mamimi's relationship here?
Well, first, I didn't realize that he was 12 or she was 17ish. I mean, I could tell. Like, I think they said he was in like, I guess you could say like middle school or whatever, or somewhere around that area. She was in high school, so I could tell there was an age difference, but that's a bit drastic. So that definitely adds something to it. So yeah, it's kind of a almost creepy, maybe kind of creepy relationship, but not like it. She's an interesting character just because you can see like you learn bits and pieces about her throughout the episodes, and you find out like, oh, she's poor and everyone thinks she's stupid and stuff like that, and everyone like kind of laughs at her and makes fun of her, and that she gets bullied and stuff like that, and he kind of like notices that, and so they kind of have that interesting relationship like that. So I think that's definitely interesting, and I kind of like how they're, I don't know, I guess they're sort of there for each other, I guess you could say. It is super odd that she was involved with his brother, and then after he left, she just kind of went to the younger brother. So that's interesting and odd, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, but she is interesting. Just again, yeah, with the whole fire starter game that she was playing, and then kind of alluded to her being like the arson, the one in town that's burning down everything. I was like, whoa, that's an interesting element, and I want to like sort of delve into that more. So it's an interesting relationship that they have. Definitely not a conventional one, or one that people might find to be controversial considering the age difference and how they might be. Like, I guess they don't exactly say how old they are, but maybe they did, and I just missed it. So maybe it could be like up for interpretation of their ages, so it's a little less creepy, but it still seemed a bit creepy to me. But it was, I don't know, like it was kind of nice to see like the sort of bonding, I guess, they kind of had, and how they're you can see she has a rough life and is going through rough times, and he's kind of just there for her, but like his family like doesn't like her, like he wouldn't, like they wouldn't like, allow her into the house. So that's like interesting. So she's kind of has like this whole like sort of tragic life that sort of surrounds her. So it's interesting to see, and I kind of hope that more of it will be explored maybe in later episodes, to get just more on, what's going on with her and everything like that. So it's an interesting relationship, but an odd one for sure.
Yeah, like I think they managed to, I think, keep it from being like overly creepy, because I suppose the idea is that with the main character is that it's meant to be his kind of like maturity thing. So initially he's not really aware that of kind of like what her like intentions are with like whatever their relationship is, and that he obviously doesn't consider her like his girlfriend, or like he isn't aware that there's like a relationship there between them that's like that. And then I don't think she also considers him like her new boyfriend or anything like that. She just kind of, in a way, is just kind of using him for like support because the brother isn't there. And as I said, definitely one of the more interesting parts of the show so far. But Greg, what are your thoughts on that relationship?
Yeah, it is an interesting sort of relationship that they have here, and it's interesting how they show it, I guess, sort of explored in the beginning towards, I guess, maybe not so much so like a complete sort of resolution, but how they sort of, portrayed as the series, I guess goes along, and sort of, the ups and downs that, any sort of relationship would have. It's definitely, I guess, explored in different ways, and it's definitely, like Harrison said, it can seem, I guess, a bit sort of odd and creepy, but like what Morgan said, with this being sort of like the journey is sort of Naota's sort of like maturity over these 6 episodes, it definitely speaks to how he sort of sees just relationships in general with Mamami and sort of every other sort of character here. It's something that they explored, and I think it's interesting how they it's never like it's never so much so that it's like really sort of overbearing or super sort of, I guess, mature or anything, but they do they drop enough hints that if you're paying attention to it, you will sort of be aware of sort of his change and sort of his development over the course of the episodes, which I think is interesting that they sort of add that to the storyline and his sort of personal journey, along with all the robot fighting and the guitars and the Vespas and sort of everything else that's going along. They definitely choose to mix a lot of different things in, which I think is one of the reasons why this series is so interesting for a lot of people. It just has those different sort of elements that you have to sort of try to figure out and sort of piece them together for yourself. But I guess sort of going along with this theme of relationships, what were your guys' thoughts on the relationship with Naoto and sort of Haruko, which I guess is sort of our beginning sort of crux of this whole sort of series that we have here?
Yeah, like this is a weird one in that clearly she's like the weird character. She's the one who acts crazy and is like has all these different disguises and is doing all this stuff. And obviously I think she knows way more about what's going on in the town than he does, and is kind of being secretive herself and not telling everything. So it's kind of hard to really get a judge, at least kind of right now, on kind of what exactly the relationship is, and that it feels like she's out there kind of like searching for something and potentially has found it in Naota, given that this guitar hit to the head has actually activated something. It kind of seems like these robots coming out of his head is kind of something she was in a way prepared for almost. So in terms of them like as kind of just like 2 characters, it's an interesting one in that I think the idea here, what they're going for, is that obviously Naota says at the start that like nothing ever happens here, and because he's now met her, all this stuff is going to happen that's going to help him mature and kind of have this kind of transition point in his life, and he'll be very different having met her than if he had never met her. And that's kind of where they're going with this right now, in that I suppose just the idea of like it's through these kind of crazy situations that he's beginning to see these like, oh, here's some of the issues in Mamimi's life which maybe he would have like ignored previously, and that it's only with this crazy fires and kind of following her around that he kind of comes across like, oh, there she is, like when she kind of should be in school and she's kind of washing in the river or something like that. Yeah, in terms of their just direct character relationship. I don't get the best sense of it right now, but I think going forward it could be pretty interesting. But Harrison, what are your thoughts on Naota and Haruko's relationship?
It's definitely an interesting one to be sure. Yeah, she's quite the crazy character for sure, and yeah, seeing all her weird disguises and things like that is interesting, and how she's just staying at his house is like, oh, okay, this is happening. Like again, just sort of suspend your belief and just go with it, and it's a kind of a funny relationship that they have going on. So I think that was some of the parts where I thought was more comedic and actually like got to me and stuff like that. Where other stuff I just maybe not quite so much, like this whole stuff where she was oh, I'll sleep in the top bunk. He's like, oh no, that's my brother. She's like, fine, well, then I'll sleep in the bottom because there's nowhere else. Like, and his reaction was just some of the were kind of comedy I actually found to be a bit funny. And yeah, just she's always like in her bad driving, which like her insanely bad driving, I should say, is also one of the comedic elements that I thought definitely like kind of worked for me. How he is constantly going on about her bad driving, and she's like, "Oh no, I'm a fine driver. What are you talking about?" Even though she hit him in her opening scene, so it's interesting for sure. And also with the whole guitar thing, like I want to know more about why she hit him, or if I don't remember if she hit him on purpose or not, and then just how that created the robot start coming out of his head. If that was like a thing she did on purpose, or what's the whole point of all that, and what's her purpose in this town? Because like like you said, Morgan, like they say like it's a normal town where nothing ever happens, and then she shows up, and all this craziness just comes with her. And so I'm interested, like, was it just chance, or did she come here on purpose, knowing what she was looking for, or all that kind of stuff like that? So yeah, their relationship is like very, I guess, a comedic one. Not too sure like what her purpose is, or because she, like you said, Morgan, she definitely seems to know a lot more than what she lets on. And she seems to be very well prepared to fight robots, even though they quite literally come out of nowhere. So is that just like her job, or what's going on, and stuff like that? So she's an intriguing character because we don't know a whole lot about her, and she's just crazy as can be with everything that just happened around her. So I think it's probably one of the more maybe interesting things of the show.
Yeah, it definitely does spark a lot of interest, their relationship and how it's developing. And yeah, I guess in these first two episodes, you don't get quite, I guess, a super clear sort of idea on how the relationship actually works. But it is something that they do, explore as the episodes go on. And it's interesting how much they do actually get of their relationship in these 6 episodes, and you've already seen 2, so there's only 4 left. So they definitely do a good bit of actually sort of exploring, and you do learn a bit of the relationship and a bit of the reason why she's actually there. So it's not something that's sort of completely sort of mysterious for the rest of the episodes, but it's still something that is like most things in this series, is up to interpretation, as far as how much you sort of believe what she's actually saying versus what you actually sort of come to understand for her reasoning, sort of being in the town, and her seemingly preparedness and just, I guess, abilities, somehow to be able to fight these monsters with a guitar, and how that plays out later on. So it definitely is a odd sort of interesting relationship, but it's one that definitely, you can sort of you see how it works through the development of Naota and his just, his maturity, or his growing maturity over these 6 episodes, and how that works out. But it definitely is something, I guess, to keep in mind as the series goes on. But I think we're back to you, Morgan, for another talking point.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll go for the animation style with the show here, which for me is definitely probably the big standout of like this show so far, in that some of the character stuff is good, but I think it's the animation that is the real standout so far. It's just obviously very characterful, and there's tons of movement and stuff going on. You can tell a ton of effort went in. This is like a really kind of high-end kind of animation, just with how everything works, from the the robot scenes, and even the like crazier scenes of like the robot coming out of his head. And then even just like smaller scenes where there's not a lot going on screen, there's still just so much happening with the animation, and it looks really kind of nice and clean, and it flows really nicely. And it's probably one of the few points where it's like, okay, I sort of get with the animation, perhaps, where like the likes of Mike and Brian and so on, the creators of the show, of Avatar and Korra, like get some inspiration from this, because I suppose plot, character-wise, it's kind of hard to see maybe where they get inspiration from, but animation-wise, you can definitely get that sense, and that like, oh, like Asami meeting Mako is clearly a reference to how, you know, Haruko meets Naota here, and so on. But like outside of that, like really kind of obvious reference, it's kind of hard to get the greatest sense of like character-wise, is there anything here, but the animation I think is for me one of the best kind of aspects of the show. But Harrison, what are your thoughts on the animation of Fooly Cooly?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting choice. How everything's very like over exaggerated and stuff like that. Like how you have like all the crazy stuff, like in all like reality, like, you know, like, oh, that's not physically happening. So it's not like a animation style that's meant to reflect, you know, realism, sort of maybe how Korra is. It's just a very over exaggerated style, like how when they're like in the hospital, or like fighting or whatever, and you see like the building jump up and like spin around and stuff like that. Like it's very like interesting over exaggerated style like that, and not one that I've seen before. You know, even though I have very little experience in the anime department, but it was definitely one of the more interesting things for me to show. It always made things interesting to watch at the very least. It was always just interesting how they chose to portray how a scene was being had out like that. The one sequence where it looked like they were just filming manga and just going through a scene like that, like it was just a very unique choice, and that the whole animation style might be one of my favorite things of the show, just because it was just so different and unique, something I have never seen before. And I don't know if, you know, if other shows have done this, but even if they have, I don't know if any other show maybe has done it to this extent, because almost every single scene is done in an interesting, unique way, and it's not all the same way character. Like the scene where it looks like they're filming manga, it just happens that one time, at least in these first 2 episodes. And so it's just very interesting to see the different styles and ways they choose to have a scene play out and things like that. So I find all that very like interesting and just entertaining. At least seeing all the over exaggerated reactions from characters and stuff like that is like, in the way like the dramatic, like, you know, camera movements and stuff like that. Like the whole scene when the biker girl is giving CPR to him after she like hits him with the bike, and like just the way like the camera like moves and zooms in and stuff like that, and the way the characters like faces are is like all like over exaggerated, but it's that's what makes it entertaining. So I definitely really like how it's all crazy and adds to the whole sort of zany feel of the whole show, and definitely one of my favorite parts of the show, just because it makes everything so entertaining to watch at the very least. Even if you don't like maybe what's happening, you can at least like the way it's you're seeing it happen at the very least.
Yeah, it definitely has a very uniqueness and entertaining sort of feel to the animation in general, and it definitely is one of the things that is, you know, pretty highly praised for the series. And I think that's, you know, it's also one of the benefits of it only being 6 episodes and being just an OVA. They can, you know, they can pour, you know, more effort per frame, I guess you could say, into the actual sort of designing of it, rather than, you know, a 26 or, you know, whatever, you know, longer running sort of series where they have to, you know, they have to meet the mark and it has to be out by a certain time, and, you know, you have people sort of waiting on it, and, you know, it has to air on broadcast and pass all that sort of stuff. With it just being an OVA, they can definitely, you know, do different things, you know, add unique styles. Like the manga sort of part of it, I think, is definitely one of those parts that stands out to many people, and they do sort of try to do it later on, but they make a funny joke about it. So it's definitely, you know, everything is very sort of unique. It's very sort of on point. It's definitely, you know, it looks clean, it flows well, you know, even, you know, and they also can blend it out as well, because there, you know, there are times when they do have, you know, scenes that are more, you know, down to earth, more, you know, not sort of super realistic with, you know, things sort of exploding, especially when they have I guess sort of the quieter moments between characters. They're not always sort of as abstract, I guess you could say, as later on scenes where they're sort of flying around and stuff with the guitar. So it definitely is something where they they put a lot of effort in. They make note of how different they can sort of be, and how even if the animation is crazy, it fits with whatever the scene is I think is trying to accomplish. If it's a battle scene or a talking scene or anything sort of in between, it works for what they're specifically trying to go for. But I guess we're back around to Harrison for another point if you have one.
Let's see here. I guess just maybe a small one could be oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Goodness gracious. I guess we could go with the main guy. I don't remember what his name is, but like just his family, I guess you could say, like the whole like sort of social status that they've got going on. It seems like they're well off, as in compared to his girlfriend with the whole poor thing, and how they sort of maybe look down on the poor. I guess does that make sense?
Yeah, like it's interesting. We don't get too much information on his dad and granddad who we meet here. The main scene with them is that kind of manga visual scene where they just say like "Fooly over and over again," just basically the two of them talking about like, oh, you have a relationship with Mamimi, and then here's Haruko as well, and just the kind of comparisons, and like, oh, you're going to do Fooly Cooly with them, and so on, and just kind of presenting that like kind of pretty much both of them, but his dad especially is kind of a very kind of weird character. You're not meant to take him particularly seriously, at least right now it doesn't seem. And then the grandfather is like quite similar, but he's the one who seems to have an issue with Mamimi kind of being around the house at all. But yeah, right now those two are kind of primarily used, it seems like, for kind of comedy, and that like the robot just randomly in the second episode, and they're ordering it around to do all these chores for them, and you wouldn't think that they'd kind of be ordering the robot around, but they are. So that was pretty funny how they used them. But I suppose, Harrison, what were your thoughts on how they used Naota's father and grandfather?
It was interesting. Like the grandfather, the whole thing of him disliking the poor. Like, I wonder if we're gonna get any more on that and stuff like that. And I guess sort of the whole them teasing the main guy about the whole like girlfriend stuff, and them finding out and everything like that. It was definitely interesting. And then yeah, I do like how the dad was just sort of ordering the robot around, and like saying like, oh well, he likes to be outside, and he likes to have some personal time every single day and things like that. I just thought it was a very interesting thing and comedic thing where he's like sort of ordering the robot about, but also like making note of how the robot's feelings are, which is interesting because so the whole like discussion of do robots have feelings and everything like that can be had, and so it's just interesting how he's I guess he's treating the robot nicely, whereas the grandfather we see like has the robot like order like go get like takeout food or something like that, I think it was, and he comes back and he's yelling at the robot and stuff like that. So I wonder if that's going to play into it later, how grandfather mistreats it, whereas the dad is very caring of the robot's feelings and making sure it, like you said, like is outside and things like that. So, and how he's saying like, I guess he wants to have a normal thing of the robot living with the family and how it's a symbol or something like that. So it was interesting. So I wonder if there's going to be any more on them, with whole dad not mistreating the robot and the grandfather mistreating the robot, or if that's just kind of their characters and it's just a comedic thing. So it was interesting and comedic.
Yeah, the family dynamic that they have in here is definitely an interesting one. It does, and it does come into play later on. Maybe not so much specifically with the robots, but definitely with Haruku specifically. You definitely get to see how that plays with Naota and sort of, I guess sort of the relationships that they have between them and sort of how they go, I guess just back and forth with that whole sort of, I guess I don't know, I guess you say three-way sort of relationship and how, Naoto sort of sees his father with Haruku and sort of back and forth. So it definitely, it definitely does come into play later on. Maybe not so much with the grandpa. He definitely, he definitely stays there as an element, but he doesn't, get quite as much of focus as the father does, specifically. So it definitely is a interesting sort of dynamic. His father definitely isn't one that you probably would take, very sort of serious, even though he sometimes tries to act very serious in certain situations. But there is some interesting things that sort of happen later on with him, which I won't say too much about because I will spoil it. But yeah, no, his family dynamic definitely is interesting. You don't really get anything on the mother at any sort of, or what sort of happened to her, but there definitely is, the family definitely plays a role as far as Naota's sort of development, which you would have in any sort of family dynamic. So I guess one of my sort of last-ish points that I guess I want to bring up, and there's not too much in here later on in these first two episodes, but it does get played on later on. But I guess just sort of the idea of school in general, in these first two episodes, you do get to see a little bit of Naota in school and some of his friends, and you do get sort of the reference to the old school that was sort of brought down. But I guess just sort of how that worked for you guys in terms of these first two episodes, as far as him being I guess just a school kid in general, just sort of dealing with all this stuff.
Yeah, like it isn't really too much of a focus in kind of many ways. This kind of school aspect is more presented with like Mamimi, and like how she basically is implied to have like burned down the old school, and like saying that she hated school, and especially with the like I suppose the implication that she potentially doesn't ever attend school, that there's some issues there with her and school, and that I suppose for her, just as a character, that she doesn't have a lot, I suppose, going for her. And one of the only things she ever did have was the relationship with Naota's brother, and now that that's gone, she's in a kind of weird transition point in her life as well. So Naota in school, it just seems like, okay, he goes and we kind of meet up with him when he's like just finished or just arriving in school, but we don't get too much of an idea about like if he himself is like school or not. But maybe he'll help Mamimi with her issues with school or something like that. That could be pretty interesting. But Harrison, what are your thoughts on the kind of I suppose school dynamic with some of these characters?
Yeah, it's definitely more interesting with the girlfriend focusing on what's the whole thing that's going on with hers. So like she's in high school, like, especially with the scene where she like arrives at his school and is waiting for Naoto. Is that the main guy's name?
Naota.
Naota. Okay. So yeah, when she's waiting at his school for him, and just like the way we see like the other students sort of react to their relationship and stuff like that, like they're calling it like his older girlfriend and wife and stuff like that, and how they kind of like look down on her even though she's older, and saying like, oh, she looks stupid and she's still in high school. Like I think some of them even say like how pathetic and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see like how they sort of view her even though she is older than them, and how they just think she is so like below them, I guess you could say. So it's interesting to see that, and I wonder if that will come into more play, and how the whole thing of the school burnt down apparently very recently, because she went to school there and so did the brother. So I wonder, I do hope to see like what all is going on with that, and maybe since it's implied that she burned it down, like exactly what her reasonings are for burning it down, because we get the whole thing of she doesn't like school. Now she's never in school, but is there more to it than that? Like, is she just not good at school so she doesn't like it, or maybe at the school, like that's where the brother discovered he was good at baseball and that's why he went away to America, and maybe she doesn't like that and is upset about that because baseball took him away from her, and he learned that at school, so maybe that's where her father started. It could be maybe I'm just like reading way too into it, but it's an interesting thing to see, like, her whole reasoning for burning down the school, and how, and if like Naota like figures that out, what kind of effect that would have on him if he like sees like she is this arson which he seems to be figuring out. But so it's an interesting aspect. Like, we don't get a whole lot of how he views school or anything like that. It's mostly just how people view his girlfriend, and how everyone sort of reacts to their relationship and things like that. So if we get more stuff on him, that'll definitely be interesting, because we definitely don't have a lot to go on now. So it's more interesting on her side of things than his at the moment.
Yeah, it definitely is more interesting, these first two episodes, on Mamimi's sort of background with school and the issues that she has or has had in the past. And yeah, it is interesting that they did go to the school very recently. I mean, I guess when they were in elementary school, so it is a good number of years ago, but they all still sort of remember it, and it is, I guess, somewhat fresh in their minds. But yeah, it is interesting. School definitely does, I guess, in some aspects plays a role later on, as far as our characters sort of interacting with each other and sort of their, I guess, ideas and goals as far as how they view, I guess, the town, I guess you could say. It sort of plays into that. There's never like a huge focus on school, but you definitely do see them go to school and do some of your typical sort of school activities. Of course, like the show, you probably can figure out those typical activities don't last too long before something crazy happens. So there's always something interesting and something to sort of, I guess, spice things up. But it definitely has a aspect of the show, especially with Mamimi, just sort of the school in it specifically, and the fact that she's, she seems to always be in her school uniform, even if she doesn't actually, go to school, or we never see her go to school. So it definitely is something to keep in mind as the series goes on. But I guess we'll go around for a last set of any sort of ending thoughts you guys have before we close this up.
Yeah, I suppose the last little point I have is just that I did find it interesting in like the last fight scene that what happened was that Naota was kind of like swallowed by the main robot Conti, and the red color kind of came back to it then, and then it was able to fight really well. But when Naota kind of came out of it, it didn't kind of necessarily seem like Naota was like controlling it in any way, but him just being like in it somehow gave it extra power, which was kind of interesting, given that like they've already established that the robot came from like inside of his head, and now he gives it power by being inside it. So it's this weird portal thing that the two of them seem to have, and I don't know if they're establishing that that's like a connection in terms of like, oh, how fights are going to work from here on out, where like you let your robot swallow you, and then you make it more powerful, and it gains colors and stuff like that. But it was interesting, and then they just kind of joked about it, like, why are you all sticky after coming out of it? But Harrison, what were your thoughts on that interesting development of Naota being swallowed by the robot in the last fight?
Yeah, again, that was unexpected, and it was just like, oh, okay, it just ate him. So I was expecting some kind of, like, I don't know, sort of, like, I guess, transformation of the robot, and, to an extent it did, like, the color change, so I thought that was interesting, and it, fought well, and then it just, then he just got out of it. Just the way they animated that was just interesting as well, so it's interesting to see it. Like, I am curious to see if that's going to be, like, a thing from now on, if like these two they're more powerful together, so they can fight bigger robots, or if that was just a one-time thing, or just see how that'll work. So it was interesting, and I'm curious to see how that will be brought up again in the later parts of the series.
Yeah, no, that fight definitely is an interesting one, and his sort of, I guess, amped up sort of abilities, and they do make an interesting, I guess, sort of tandem, and that is that is explored later on a bit more. There's never any sort of, I guess, sort of hard facts, sort of details, like he goes inside and he gets X level power up or anything like that, but they, you know, it definitely is something that is explored later on, and you see how it takes, you know, on different aspects for, I guess, other creatures that they have to battle, and you know how it works or how it might not work. It definitely is something that is notable and does, you know, reoccur a couple times later on in the series, for the couple, you know, episodes that this whole sort of series lasts for. So it definitely is something to note as the series go on, but it, you know, it might take a different sort of aspect than what you guys may or may not think. I guess it sort of depends, but I guess Harrison, if you have any last points before we wrap.
No, that's it. That's it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so I mean, you know, it's definitely a interesting and odd series, and you know, it definitely, I don't know, it definitely has sort of I guess a polarizing sort of views from different sets of peoples. I mean, I don't know, I think for most people, or at least it seems like critically, it gets a lot of, you know, praise, as you guys might have already, you know, sort of noticed. But you know, for the general viewer, I think it's one of the things that's either, you know, hit or miss in terms of, you know, do you get it, or can you sort of, you know, just sort of run for it and enjoy it for what it is. So what are your guys' final thoughts on these first 2 episodes, and would you recommend it or continue watching it?
Yeah, like overall, I'd say like I enjoyed watching these 2 episodes because the animation was really nice, and there was a few kind of interesting ideas going on here. You know, if I had any, I suppose, worry maybe about going forward, it would just be that perhaps it may end up being a case of like all style and very little substance, but hopefully they can bring it all together and actually like have the series have like some kind of actual like meaning to its story and link everything together somehow. And you know, because it is only 6 episodes and I've already watched 2, there's only 4 to go, so like I realistically will watch the other 4 episodes just to kind of be able to say that like, yep, I've watched FLCL, this kind of very notable anime that a lot of people talk about, just to say I've actually seen the whole thing because it is so short. Kind of why not? It's not like really bad or anything like that. It's right now pretty solid, and I'm, you know, somewhat excited to see where it goes from here. But I think the main thing would just be that it hasn't like it didn't like crazy impress me, and especially when like in relation to what we discuss most of the time, like Avatar and Korra, like I don't really see like why like Mike Bryan, like Giancarlo Volpe, those type of people are like, you know, we had the whole team watch this show to like prepare for like working on Avatar. I'm just like, okay, I guess I don't really see the connection or like what really stands out, and like I don't watch this and instantly think like, oh, Avatar's what it is because of this show, at least right now. But so overall, I'd say like, yeah, I'm gonna watch more of this, and in terms of a recommendation, I'd like at least check it out because it is so short, because it is so well regarded for the most part. Why not check it out is I suppose my general thoughts. But Harrison, what are your final thoughts? Would you recommend this show to other people?
Probably about the same as you. I mean, since it is so short, I mean, it is kind of one of those things where it's just like, you know, at least, yeah, why not? I mean, it's short, and if it's as popular as you guys are saying it is, because I'm not really involved at all in online community about anime, so I don't know what's big and what's not. So if it is such a huge thing, I mean, like, it is one of those things where, you know, at the very least, yeah, have everyone check it out just to that first episode, because I think you'll know like almost immediately if you're gonna like the show or if it's or if it's just not for you. So, and that's so yeah, I'd probably have people at the very least, you know, like watch it just because it is such an odd show and it is so like highly regarded. So you know that what do you got to lose? So and as for myself, like since I've already, you know, watched, you know, the first 2 episodes and it is just so very short. I mean, it's again one of those things of why not? Why I don't really have a reason to not watch it, I guess, because I'm interested in what's going on in the story and the animation is just so interesting. So yeah, I probably will also watch it again just so I can say I've watched it, since especially since my anime experience is so very limited. I can at the very least say, okay, well, I'm branching out more. I've at least finished one anime in my life, so that'll at least be a good thing. So yeah, I'll probably definitely finish it just for those reasons alone, but also because I am interested in it.
Yeah, it definitely is a odd one, and I mean, I would definitely recommend it just because it is very popular. It is for some people it can be sort of their gateway into anime, at least sort of the weirder aspects of anime. So if you want to see sort of the range of what anime can be, this might be a show to check out just to sort of get an idea on that part of anime and what it can be if you have almost no limits and a decent budget behind it for a shorter type series, as some OVAs can they just have the ability to try different things. So I would definitely tell people to check it out, see if you sort of can flow with it for the first couple episodes and then continue on with it. It is quite short. I think the last episode is a little bit longer than the first 5, but it's still not much longer, so I would definitely tell people to check it out.
So yeah, that brings to an end the discussion for Fooly Cooly. And yeah, next up to choose is going to be Harrison for his first pick for the Movers podcast. So in 2 weeks' time, Harrison, what show are we going to be watching some of?
Young Justice.
Okay, that's definitely an interesting one. I've heard a lot about it without having seen a lot of it, so this definitely is going to be an interesting one to watch. But Greg, are you familiar at all with the show?
Yeah, I am familiar with it. I think I did start it a long time ago. But used to read the comics for Young Justice, which is different than the show itself. But I used to be really into the Young Justice comics, so this should be interesting.
Okay, so yeah, just again for sort of clarification, 2 weeks' time we'll be doing that. That'll be the Mirrors Podcast episode 50. We'll be reviewing the first 2 episodes of Young Justice, but for next week's podcast, we'll switch back over to the Avatar Online podcast, and we basically decided, talking just before the show, that, okay, Kelly's not here, she has the next pick, we don't have full access to our, episode still open list, so, of the episodes that we do remember still haven't been chosen, we just decided that we'll do a pretty notable one, and we'll do the book 1 air finale, episode 12, Endgame. So next week on the podcast we will review Endgame, in addition to talking about whatever news has come out in the past few weeks. But yeah, that's what's happening with that. And I suppose a quick update on the site. If you're aware, the site is back up to some degree, not fully. You can view most of the recent, you can view I think all news posts on the site. The forums aren't fully up yet, and I suppose the big one is that a lot of the admin stuff behind the scenes isn't back up yet, so I can't add new posts onto the site just yet. But Jordan is continuing to work on that stuff. As I said, it's a kind of a long fix, so he knows exactly what he needs to do. And so we'll be trying to get all that stuff prepared as soon as it goes back up. So, the next couple of weeks, the podcast may still continue to go up on my YouTube channel, but again, we're working on getting the site back up as soon as possible. But yeah, that's been episode 49 of the Movers podcast for Fooly Cooly. It's been myself, Greg, and Harrison. Thanks for listening to this podcast, and bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.